In the courts of power, the most dangerous man was rarely the one speaking the loudest, but the one whose silence could not be read. While others filled the chamber with persuasive language and dramatic promises, he stood composed, allowing ambition and insecurity to expose themselves without interruption. Silence in such a chamber was never emptiness. It was calculation. It forced every ambitious noble to wonder what was being measured, what was being remembered, and what conclusions were forming behind steady, unreadable eyes. Most men spoke because they feared irrelevance, believing that visibility created influence. Yet influence in a Machiavellian world was not born from noise, but from the ability to observe human weakness without revealing one's own intentions. When accusations flew across the table and alliances trembled under suspicion, the silent strategist did not rush to defend himself. He understood that the man who explains too quickly exposes his anxiety, while the man who waits forces others to reveal their desperation. In negotiations, silence reshaped the rhythm of power. After a proposal was made, he allowed the room to breathe heavily with uncertainty, knowing that the first man to break that tension would reveal how badly he needed approval. Silence unsettled the insecure because it offered no validation. It created a mirror in which others saw their own impatience, pride, and fear reflected more clearly than any spoken criticism could achieve. The disciplined mind treated silence not as avoidance, but as preparation. Every withheld word was a shield protecting unfinished strategy, every pause a deliberate choice to let ambition reveal itself before acting. To speak impulsively was to surrender territory. To speak deliberately was to claim it. The Machiavellian strategist understood that every sentence either strengthened or weakened position within the fragile hierarchy of power. Before mastering kingdoms, a ruler must master the chaos within himself. In the privacy of his chamber, where no courtier could applaud and no rival could threaten him, he confronted his impulses with the same discipline he expected from his soldiers. Silence in solitude revealed truths that conversation concealed. It exposed envy before it turned into policy, pride before it hardened into cruelty, and fear before it disguised itself as aggression. On the training grounds, he watched young soldiers swing their swords wildly in pursuit of strength. Yet he knew that the greatest weapon was not forged from steel, but from restraint. A sword raised in anger can win a moment, but a mind controlled in silence can win a lifetime. The strategist trained himself to pause before reacting, even when provoked beyond comfort. In the cathedral's vast silence, beneath stained glass reflecting emerald and sapphire light, he understood that noise distracts from clarity. The quiet arches taught him that strength does not require constant assertion. At the harbor where ships departed into uncertain waters, captains barked orders to command obedience. Yet the calm admiral who spoke least earned the deepest loyalty because his restraint inspired confidence. Silence allowed him to measure risk without panic. While merchants negotiated loudly over cargo and coin, he observed patterns in their desperation, knowing that fear always speaks first. Even in the armory, surrounded by spears, crossbows, and cannons, he understood that true defense begins in the mind. Weapons obey the hand, but the hand obeys emotion unless disciplined by silence. Riding alone along mountain roads in the early morning mist, he found that silence clarified intention. Away from advisors and applause, he confronted the simple question, what do I truly seek? In council chambers filled with ambition, silence exposed ego. The man who demanded agreement revealed insecurity, while the one who listened revealed control. When insulted publicly, he did not retaliate immediately. He understood that a delayed response often strikes deeper than a shouted defense. Through silence, he learned to observe the movement of alliances like pieces on a chessboard. He realized that those who speak constantly cannot listen carefully enough to detect betrayal forming quietly at the edges. In the library where ancient treaties rested in dust-lined silence, he understood that knowledge accumulates quietly, never demanding attention. The loud reformer burns quickly, but the patient reader reshapes generations without raising his voice. He trained himself to let anger pass through him like wind through open corridors. Where others reacted to insult as if it were a blade, he examined it like a scholar examining a manuscript. During banquets filled with wine and laughter, when tongues loosened and secrets slipped between silver goblets, he rarely drank beyond control. Silence kept his judgment intact while others surrendered theirs to excess. He noticed that the man who boasts most about loyalty often fears abandonment. Silence allowed him to hear insecurity beneath devotion and weakness beneath flattery. In the stable yard, as horses stamped impatiently before departure, he reflected on impulse. Even the finest stallion requires reins, and so does the human mind when ambition surges beyond reason. On the battlefield ridge, before soldiers descended into chaos, he stood in stillness longer than anyone expected. That pause allowed him to see what haste would have concealed. He learned that fear travels faster than cavalry. Silence slowed its spread within himself, preventing panic from shaping command. In private audience chambers, when rival nobles attempted provocation through subtle insult, he answered not with outrage but with attentive stillness. Their words grew sharper, yet their control weakened. Silence became his mirror. In it, he saw ambition before it hardened into tyranny and doubt before it eroded confidence. He realized that mastery of others without mastery of self leads only to temporary control. The kingdom could be conquered by force, but the mind could only be governed by discipline. In moments of public humiliation, when rumors threatened reputation, he resisted the urge to defend immediately. Time itself often dissolves accusations that pride would inflame. He studied the cadence of speech in others, noting how uncertainty trembled between syllables. Silence sharpened his hearing beyond words. In the armory, he ran his hand across polished steel and reflected that weapons do not choose their targets. Men do. Control the mind and the weapon follows. During long rides through the countryside, when only wind accompanied him, he rehearsed arguments in silence. The most powerful debate occurs within, not before an audience. He observed that the loudest general in war often compensates for fragile authority. Confidence that requires shouting is rarely secure. Silence trained his patience. Patience trained his timing. Timing shaped his victories more than numbers ever could. He learned to let others underestimate him. A quiet man invites assumptions, and assumptions breed complacency. Underestimation became his shield. It allowed him to move without resistance, to prepare without suspicion. In silence, he catalogued weaknesses as carefully as a scholar catalogues books. Patterns of envy, impatience, greed, each stored for future reference. Gradually, silence ceased to feel like restraint. It became identity. As seasons passed, his silence ceased to be strategy alone. It became armor. Insults struck him like rain against stone, leaving no visible crack through which rivals could enter. He discovered that the man who cannot be provoked cannot be controlled. Emotional independence made him immune to manipulation disguised as urgency. When others attempted to bait him into hasty commitments, he answered with measured pauses. Time became his ally, stretching moments until impatience betrayed hidden agendas. He understood that fear spreads through crowds like wildfire through dry fields. By maintaining composure, he contained panic before it could infect command. In private correspondence, where letters sealed in wax determined alliances and betrayals, he wrote sparingly. Each word carried intention, and each omission carried weight. Silence sharpened his perception of ambition in others. He could see it flicker in restless eyes and tremble in tightened hands long before it was spoken aloud. In the grand hall where banners of royal purple and emerald hung heavy from stone beams, he rarely interrupted debate. Instead, he allowed egos to collide until clarity emerged from their exhaustion. He learned that dominance need not announce itself. Authority that whispers commands more loyalty than authority that shouts. On horseback riding through fog-laced valleys at dawn, he reflected that clarity grows in stillness. Movement without reflection leads only to wandering. He ceased reacting to rumors that drifted like smoke through corridors. Smoke dissipates when ignored, only wind gives it shape. In the armory's metallic stillness, surrounded by spears and cannons, he understood that violence is crude persuasion. The mind disciplined by silence commands without drawing steel. He discovered that when others underestimated him, they revealed their own complacency. Silence invited misjudgment, and misjudgment invited opportunity. At times, he allowed silence to linger uncomfortably long. That discomfort forced truth into the open like roots pushing through stone. Gradually, silence transformed from tactic to temperament. It shaped his posture, softened his gestures, and slowed his breath even in moments of crisis. He became difficult to read, and therefore difficult to predict. In a court governed by ambition, unpredictability was protection. When confronted with betrayal, he did not react in rage. He studied the pattern that produced it, ensuring it would not repeat. In councils of war, he waited until every general had exhausted his certainty. Only then did he speak, and when he did, the room listened. His silence no longer unsettled only rivals, it steadied allies. They trusted his restraint because it promised stability. He realized that true power is not the ability to command others, but the inability of others to command him. The court continued to speak, to argue, to boast. Yet beneath their noise, his silence directed the current of decisions. He no longer feared isolation, for solitude had refined his judgment. The absence of applause strengthened rather than weakened him. In the end, he discovered that silence is not emptiness, but authorship. It allows one to choose when to enter the narrative rather than be consumed by it. His composure became legend, though few understood its origin. They mistook it for mystery, unaware it was discipline refined over years. He no longer needed to assert dominance, for his presence alone altered the room's behavior. Silence gave him clarity, clarity gave him patience, patience gave him inevitability. Even when storms gathered beyond the palace walls, he remained centered within himself. Outer chaos could not command inner disorder. Where others reacted, he evaluated. Where others rushed, he waited. Where others demanded certainty, he cultivated understanding. Over time, silence ceased to be noticed at all. It simply became the quiet gravity around which the court revolved. He had mastered not only the politics of men, but the turbulence within his own mind. No insult, no rumor, no ambition could disturb his equilibrium. And thus, without raising his voice or unsheathing his blade, he ruled, not through fear, but through the quiet authority of a mind governed entirely by itself.